How can one idea, just one, completely change the world? I mean, really take root and reshape the entire destiny of a nation? It's a question that's defined history, and it's exactly what we're going to dig into today. So we're zeroing in on that really pivotal time right after 1900. This is when the ideas of communism and this powerful demand to redistribute resources, well, they just spread like wildfire. And these weren't just abstract theories, right? They set the stage for actual revolutions, massive conflicts, and the creation of societies the world had never seen before. And, there's really no better place to start this deep dive than with China. We're talking about a country that went through one of the most incredible, most profound transformations of the entire 20th century.
Okay, so the path to communist power in China, it was anything but a straight line. I mean, it was messy. After imperial rule collapsed in 1911, the whole nation was just plunged into chaos. You had this brutal civil war between the nationalists and the communists. Then that gets put on pause because of the Japanese invasion during World War II. But as soon as the war's over, the civil war starts right back up, and with a vengeance. Finally, by 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Party comes out on top, with some serious backing from the Soviet Union and, crucially, the massive rural peasant population. So, one of the very first things the new government does is tackle land reform. But here's where it gets interesting. Unlike in the Soviet Union, where trying to collectivize land was met with just violent resistance, the first phase in China was actually kind of smooth. So what was the difference? Well, it all came down to trust. Mao's party had spent years during the Civil War building relationships with the peasants. They'd already laid all the groundwork. But this is where the two paths just completely split. When it came to industrialization, Mao's vision was totally different from Stalin's. See, the Soviets were all about heavy industry, big factories in the cities. Mao, he championed this world-based idea called the Great Leap Forward. The goal was to turn the entire countryside into a massive hub of small-scale production. We're talking things like backyard steel furnaces in every village. And the result? It was an absolute catastrophe, a total disaster. The steel they were making in those backyard furnaces, most of it was useless. You combine that with a string of bad harvests, and it led to one of the deadliest famines in all of human history. I mean, the sheer number of people who died, it's just staggering to even think about. And you know what's truly heartbreaking? It's how a rigid idea made a terrible situation so much worse. Mao was just so determined to prove that his vision of communism was the best that he actually refused foreign aid. He kept exporting grain that could have saved millions, while his own people were starving to death. It's just this tragic textbook example of an ideology colliding head-on with reality. So China's story is incredibly powerful, but it wasn't happening in a bubble, not at all. These same fundamental ideas, communism, resource redistribution, they were taking root all over the world. But as you're about to see, they played out in wildly different ways. So let's take a quick world tour, shall we? We'll see how this all unfolded in Africa, the rest of Asia, and Latin America. The Cold War made for some seriously strange bedfellows. I mean, just look at the Suez Crisis in Egypt. You've got the nationalist leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who decides to nationalize the canal, basically put it under state control. Well, Britain and France, who used to control it, invade to take it back. Then the Soviets threatened to jump in on Egypt's side. But here's the crazy twist. It was the United States that stepped in and forced its own allies, Britain and France, to back down. They were terrified it would escalate into a much bigger war. Okay, now let's jump over to Ethiopia, where we see a completely different story. A revolution in 1974 brings in a Soviet-backed socialist government. And guess what their goal was? Land redistribution. Sound familiar? But here the dream just curdled into a nightmare. We're talking widespread famine, total economic collapse, and a horrifyingly brutal period of political violence they called the Red Terror. It's just a really sobering reminder of how good intentions can lead to absolutely tragic outcomes. Over in Asia, you get these two fascinatingly different models for getting to the same goal. In North Vietnam, after a long, brutal war, the new communist government radically seized land from the wealthy and gave it to the poor. But then you look at the state of Kerala in India. They achieved a really similar outcome, giving tenants the right to buy the land they worked, but they did it peacefully, through democratic laws. No violent revolution needed. Iran, wow, now that is a really complex case. The Shah, who is backed by the US, launches this thing called the White Revolution. And on paper, the goals sounded pretty progressive, right? Land for the peasants, giving women the right to vote, modernization. But here's the thing. These top-down reforms ended up alienating the super powerful clergy and even some of the rural folks they were supposed to help.
And all that anger and resentment, it fueled a massive backlash that eventually exploded into the 1979 Iranian Revolution.
And then, of course, right on America's doorstep, you have Cuba. Fidel Castro's revolution was all about one thing: ending the island's economic dependence on the United States. His government went in and seized massive amounts of land from large estates. And yeah, that included a lot of land owned by major U.S. corporations. And when the U.S. backed that failed Bay of Pigs invasion, well, that just pushed Cuba straight into the arms of the Soviet Union.
All right, so we've bounced around the globe, from China to Egypt, Iran to Cuba. We've seen how these ideas played out in such dramatically different ways. So the big question is, why? What are the common threads here? What connects all these movements? Why did this massive wave of change sweep the globe when and where it did? Okay, so the first big driver, let's call it internal tension. And it was explosive. In pretty much every single one of these cases, you find societies that were just plagued by massive economic inequality. A tiny few owned everything, and everyone else had nothing. Add to that a really deep, powerful desire to just be free from foreign control, and boom, you've got the perfect storm for radical change. Second, you have to remember that none of this was happening in a vacuum. You had the legacy of colonialism, which left behind these deep scars and a lot of resentment. That created this constant backdrop of instability. And then, layered right on top of that, you had the Cold War. It was like this intense global chess match between the US and the Soviet Union, and their competition influenced pretty much every single one of these local conflicts, constantly pushing and pulling things in different directions. And finally, the third driver was the power of the idea itself. Think about it. Ideologies like communism and socialism offered this really compelling blueprint for a totally different future. But, and this is the key thing we've seen over and over, that blueprint was never built the same way twice. It was always the local leaders, the unique national history, that shaped the final result. That's how the same core idea could lead to such wildly different outcomes.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway? What's the lasting legacy of all these movements? I mean, why does this history, from more than half a century ago, still matter so much today? Well, the truth is the echoes are absolutely everywhere. When you hear people today debating wealth inequality or land ownership or the influence of global powers, those aren't new conversations. They are the direct continuation of the exact same struggles we've just been talking about. Understanding this history is, frankly, essential for making sense of the world we live in right now. And that leaves us with one last really big question to chew on. How is it that the same fundamental desire, the desire to build a better, more just, more equal society, can lead to such wildly different outcomes? How can it result in democratic success in one place and devastating famine in another? That right there is the central puzzle, and finding the answer is something that continues to shape our world every single day.